Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is Friday, October 17th, 2025, a day before the National No Kings protest. And I am so grateful to be joined by none other than Mark Dan, of course, of the Dan Law Firm, formerly Attorney General of the great state of Ohio. And we are recording this approximately at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and there's a lot going on. So thank you for making yourself available today, Mark. I'm so excited to catch up with you.
Me too. I'm glad to see you as well.
Thank you. So, first and foremost, I just want to ask you a couple of just, I don't know, because I'm flying like crazy today, putting a
Mhm.
lot of things together. I will fortunately be speaking at my local rally. I was trying to get you guys connected, meaning to the audience, the new untouchables, to address what we are in the midst of and what we're doing and bringing to the table on a national way. But I got to tell you, I've been involved with some of the senior leadership of the No Kings Rally Indivisible organization. And I happened to be on a national call yesterday, Mark, with two very capable and I'd say brilliant young people, probably in their 30s. But they're about as technocratic as you get. They remind me of when I came out of college studying political science and what you do when you go work for campaigns and you know all of the analytics and you have to spearhead that and you have to be very, very precise, but you're also, within the context of whatever that campaign may be. Now, here we are at a moment when obviously we see an incredibly obvious move towards authoritarianism. We could fill in that blank with many other descriptions as well. And on this call yesterday, Mark, I had heard them basically say, and I'm talking about Leah and Ezra, and they were addressing thousands and thousands of people. And what I heard in that address was we got to keep things safe. Here are all the things that they must be dealing with. I mean, we can only imagine because of what we've seen Pam Bondi and Steve Miller and Mike Johnson and obviously Donald Trump and everyone else associated with this flying MAGA circus, right? Basically, with their threats and their, targeting and their smears of, people who are anti-fascist or pro-Hamas and that sort of
Mhm.
thing. And I can kind of empathize with what kind of pressure they might be under, and also potentially, behind the scenes, what kind of influence, let's say, the DNC might have. So
Mhm.
when I listened to them address this national organization yesterday, I heard, the directions that we're going to be safe. This is how we're going to be safe. This is how we're going to, plan to deal with potentially disruptions or, let's say, ICE or other elements that come in to disrupt things to potentially, because there's a lot of fear that this could lead to potentially martial law and that sort of thing. And that's been really kind of the scuttlebutt for now months, right? As
Mhm.
this whole thing is starting to unfold. And they wanted to emphasize what the kind of things we're seeing come out of Portland, like the dancing frog and the satire, and the South Park character, and their really crazy outfits and blowing bubbles into the face masks of ice and everything else. Right? I can understand what they're doing, but what it's not is a full throated focus in a national way with tens of millions of people that would go after corruption the way obviously the new untouchables has the capacity to do. So I just want to leave that up to you, just your initial thoughts and kind of how you're seeing
Yeah,
things.
I mean, I think Trump has executed one of the best head fakes in the history of world and American politics, because what he's essentially said is is dared us to become angry, and to protest angrily, because he's gonna he's looking for that pretext to bring in the troops. Well, the truth is that he doesn't need the pretext. He's going to make it up anyway. Ask the folks in Portland and Chicago, and in Los Angeles, whether that's the case. So I think the whole premise is a brilliant on the part of the Trump Steve Miller cabal, to deter serious protest, which is the only way that change has ever been made, in authoritarianism ever been pushed back in a democratic setting. Um, uh, to to deter it by welcoming it. Hey, yeah, this is exactly what we want. Um, and see, now we have a pretext for moving in. Uh, Stay peaceful for sure, but be angry because anger is what's warranted in the moment. And this moment in history calls for an honest response to uh, anti-constitutional behavior by the government. Peaceful but honest and direct. And I don't think you need to put on a an inflatable dinosaur costume to do it. It only diminishes your credibility. Um, and they're gonna make up the narrative anyway, and they're gonna try to deploy those troops, and all we're doing is making it easier for them.
Wow.
And
Well,
and no, I'm sorry.
go. No, 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 no.
So
You
yeah.
go
So I
ahead,
mean,
please.
I think we've gotten sucked in to a brilliant tactical maneuver on the part of the aspiring authoritarians.
Look, I don't want to spend all of our time together this morning because there's so much to cover, and I want to get to what you're in the midst of,
Yeah.
obviously. But I have to set this up because twofold, right? You're the former Attorney General of the state of Ohio, so you certainly could probably appreciate all of the things that are happening in Illinois right now,
Yeah.
and not to mention in DC and everywhere else, but particularly as this is happening. And so I guess the first question I'd ask you is what kind of pressures could you convey to the audience of people in positions of authority, given what's going on, especially if they're Democrats, and this would be just as far from their pathway to their positions and so forth. Can you comment about some of that, what they're dealing with?
And again, I'm not sure I follow the premise of the question. Can you?
I'm just saying, if you were you
Yeah.
yourself,
Yeah.
the Attorney General right
Yeah.
now dealing
Yeah.
with this, what kind of pressures would you be under?
Well, I think there's going to be the pressure to make sure that people, look, first and foremost, I'm a law enforcement official, and so I want to make sure that the law is followed and enforced. And I think the state AGs and state and prosecutors who believe in the rule of law and the constitutional protections, they need to spend their time educating the public on how to peacefully protest, on how to express themselves within the bounds of our constitutional authority, and they need to protect at every turn the right to exercise that freedom of speech. And if the federal government intends to try to disrupt it, be on the scene immediately. I mean, you cannot let a single violation of someone's constitutional rights go unresponded to. You have to literally, as the Republicans did at the beginning of their administration, you have to flood the zone, and you have to make sure that there is not a single authoritarian move that doesn't receive appropriate pushback. And those office holders need to be as open-minded as possible to understand the breadth of their jurisdiction to be able to take those steps. I mean, there are immunities that apply to governmental action. Um, that and not everything, and you're not going to win every single case, but that's not a reason not to bring those cases. It's not a reason not to use the resources at your disposal to make sure the people that are challenging those authoritarian moves are being challenged, um, and not to get sucked in to some of the narratives that they're so good at spinning. The distinction between a civil order of removal and some sort of a criminal a criminal right to arrest somebody. They're totally different things, and they need to be treated totally differently. And you can't allow local law enforcement to be supporting the federal government removing people on a civil warrant, for example. And you have to protect the constitutional rights of people who are accused of perhaps being without legal status in the country for no other reason. I realized when I was traveling yesterday that I had my passport card in my wallet, which I've never historically carried. And I think subconsciously, I don't know. It's because I was that I travel, or because I'm pretty outspoken. But I literally worry about a masked person challenging my right to walk the streets of Cleveland, Ohio, as a free citizen, or in New York where I was yesterday. That's an unbelievable thing. In 63 years on Earth, I never thought I would have that, um, conscious or subconsciously. I can't think of a better way to say, hey, bug off. Then here's my American passport in my hands, or the card version of it. I don't know why I did that. I'm going to put it away because I don't, I shouldn't be carrying that around. But I think that, but it made me think about all the people who, going to work. We have we have a very popular Mexican restaurant in Mount Vernon, Ohio, which is right in the middle of red Ohio. And it's owned by some Mexican American citizens, but who naturalized Mexican American citizens, who, by the way, were voted for Trump and were MAGA. And lo and behold, ICE came and arrested all of their employees, regardless of their immigration status. This was just this week in a town about an hour from Columbus, Ohio. It might as well be idyllic middle America. Mount Vernon, Ohio is a beautiful college town. It's one of those beautiful little towns you could ever, when you have a vision of small town. Remember the play Our Town? I mean, you could have been set in Mount Vernon. And amazingly, the owners of this restaurant were stunned to learn that this all applied to them. They thought somehow they were exempt because they were red, white, and MAGA Trump supporters. But their business is shut down. They're not going to be able to find people to replace the people that were working for them. People that work for them who are legal were arrested anyway. Ultimately, I believe in all the appropriate cases released, but this isn't. You shouldn't have to presume as you walk down the streets in America that you're going to have to prove your right to walk those streets. And that's what it's come down to. And if it could happen in Mount Vernon, it most certainly can happen in New York or Chicago or Los Angeles or Cleveland. And so that's a very scary thought. So we need to so one, we need to be willing to say the words, and to be angry, and to do so peacefully and appropriately, but to also make it clear that we are serious about making sure that every single infraction of the peace, every single incursion on the constitutional rights of any American, we're going to make our business, and we're going to do we're going to do what it is in our arsenal to stop it. And we're going to insist that our office holders, who are not Donald Trump, follow the law and do what's necessary to prevent that from happening. And I think that's what the AGs and the prosecutors and the local police chiefs and the mayors and the governors in this country can do right now. And they're doing it. I mean, they're doing it to. I mean, you see it happening in Illinois. You see it happening in Oregon, quite successfully. And Trump appointed judges are defending the Constitution, which is a beautiful thing to watch. I mean, it is working how it's supposed to work, but without the anger and without the articulation of what is at stake here, you're never going to build the mass movement that you need to build in order to thwart the creep and crawl of this authoritarian movement. So we can't bite on their invitation, that if they're going to use anything we do as a pretext, to try to strengthen their authoritarian practices, to move federal troops into states, and the kinds of things that they're doing anyway without reason. So what makes you think that by dancing and singing as opposed to seriously protesting and getting angry in a peaceful and constitutional way, that it's gonna be any different? Well, what's going to be different is you don't build a mass movement around memes. You build a mass movement around ideas and around articulating a vision for how we stop this from happening and how it could happen to you next.
Wow, that was exactly what I was hoping to hear you say, and as powerful as I could imagine. Just to stay on the topic, just for one more question before we move on to next. The context of ICE as a border patrol and their creeping authoritarianism and the dispatch to Illinois, because I understand technically the notion was because I guess it's an open waterway, probably Lake Michigan, something to that effect. But then you end up with the Black Hawk helicopters. You've got these guys that are, they may as well be Army Rangers as far as I'm concerned, but I guess they're ICE. And
Mm-hmm.
here they are, I guess doing the business of immigration services under those scenarios, but having not been welcomed, obviously, by J.B. Pritzker. And then, of course, the pretense I've heard several times Trump talk about, well, there were 4,000 murders. I don't know what time period he was qualifying that as, but the notion is they're selling, because we have two different kind of channels of information, right? We have the people in the heartland that listen to Fox and all of the conservative broadcasters, and they're getting literally an Orwellian sort of view of what most of us who follow these statistics understand, that crime is down in major blue cities over the course of the last, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years, not to mention some of the red cities have skyrocketing crime, right? And so we're not seeing ICE in those. Can you kind of just give me your sense of the whole as we're looking at this?
Yeah, look, what they're doing I mean, first of all, everybody needs to understand what they're doing with ICE is completely separate from what's going on, in terms of any kind of risk of crime in big cities. Is there some occasional crossover? Is there somebody who is not somebody of legal status who commits a crime in America? Of course that happens. And I think they've done a great job of pointing that out. But it is not it is not it is not proof in any way that crime is being driven by the fact that people who are not of legal status are free and roaming the streets of Chicago or Portland, or Cleveland, Ohio. There is no evidence whatsoever of that. Uh, you know what the government could be doing if they really wanted to crack down on crime is helping local police departments embrace technology to identify criminal trends and behaviors, and before they happen, whether somebody's a citizen or non-citizen. Because again, look, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're a citizen or non-citizen. If you commit a crime, then constitutionally you can and should be arrested, and you should be tried, and you should be punished if you violate the law. And I don't think anybody disagrees with that, Democrat, Republican, or vegetarian. I mean, I think everybody's on board with that. Um, but there is not there's this syllogy that they're trying to make between the business and work of ICE and law enforcement. It just doesn't exist in the real world. And I know that because I know what local law enforcement needs. They don't need more vehicles or more M14 rifles. They need information, and they need the ability to process that information. They need good forensics, so that you can take the bullets that are found at a crime scene and identify which guns they've come from. Um, that's the stuff that the federal government can do and can do well. And to develop, crime intelligence centers across the country where where all the different, everybody from the FBI on down to the local sheriff's office can share data and benefit from that data and use it to figure out when this stuff is going to happen and how to stop it from happening the next time. And what crimes and what kind of behaviors that the police ought to be out on the lookout for, where resources ought to be deployed going forward. Um, because the all the folks on the in uniform, marching through big cities are doing is causing people to be uncomfortable, and they're not solving the underlying problem. And to the extent, look, every city in America has a crime problem. I mean, because if one crime gets committed today, it's a problem. I mean, crime is all, and crime has been happening, since human beings uh, started to live in civilized society. Some people break the rules and don't operate on behalf of the greater good. I mean, it's unfortunately there's some degree of human nature involved in all this, but focusing on how do we stop that behavior, and instead of focusing on and if you're doing that, you should not be embarrassed about it. You don't show up in a mask to constitutionally exercise the law enforcement authority of the federal or state government. You show up, and you show your face and you wear a name tag and a body cam so that you can proudly show a jury or a judge exactly how you did your job. And that's another scary part of this that needs to be focused on. There shouldn't be a single federal law enforcement official operating anonymously in this country. That's scary. Those are the Halloween costumes. Those are the people. The people in costume are the folks that that ICE is sending into these cities to question people who have for whom they have no probable cause to question. So I know that's a lot in a lot of different directions, but this is all things to be angry about, and not to be and not and look. Let Saturday Night Live do the parodies. Let's use serious protest to make a serious argument about what it is we should do. What should elected officials do? What limits should individual members of the military community, where does their duty to the country start and their duty to follow orders end? Because we're getting to that point. If you're a member of the National Guard and you've been mobilized for an unconstitutional purpose, or if you're a member of the of the special forces and you're being deployed to Chicago, because in historical democratic responses to authoritarianism, that's where when the folks in the military start to peacefully protest, and to resist illegal orders, is when those authoritarian when you expose those authoritarian emperors as having no clothes.
Fantastic. One thing I want to
Although
comment
I don't
on.
think any of us want to see Trump without clothes.
I've been passing around a lot of memes of him as the emperor with no clothes, and
Yeah.
it is not a fun sight to look at.
No.
But a lot of people like to share it. I'll tell you, because you're right about
Yeah.
the memes and everything else, and that's not a real way to develop a movement on par with this movement that we've seen pretty much transpire decades by way of the billionaire technocrats and all of the things that have led to this moment. I just want to comment on this real quick to get your thoughts, and then we'll move on to the next step. But you know, I've observed for decades that for example, in conflicts in Israel, for example, um, there have been many rock throwers behind masks that were paid for by sources that were organized, that were on the front lines of the West Bank or Gaza and that sort of thing. And in 1998, there were far left protesters that were behind masks that were doing the same thing and explosions, and they were you know, vertically integrated. There was financing from groups that could be maybe espoused as terrorist groups or that were actually named terrorist groups, whether they're Hamas, Hezbollah, those sorts of things, right?
Mhm.
But here we have this really interesting dynamic over the course of, let's say, the last 24 years of the war on terror. You've got a lot of the elements of Blackwater, Eric Prince, basically a mercenary military that's gone, let's call it free agency. A lot of these guys were trained as Army Rangers, the likes that come out of the elite, you know, uh, SEAL team and that sort of thing. And they go freelance, they become mercenaries, they go work for these overlords of UAE. They're in Cyprus, they're all over the world in these things over the course of the last 24 years, right? They're behind masks. They're paramilitary guys. They're working for oil oligarchs, that sort of thing. And then during the first Trump administration, as I recall, Bill Barr had admitted that there were unmarked vehicles in places like Portland, where and Wisconsin and others during the Black Lives Matter protests, where a lot of these return guys and nobody really bothered in media to ask who they were and why they were. But I do recall that Bill Barr had said that the DOJ had some sort of, I don't know, capacity to be able to enable, I guess, masked paramilitary forces on our streets to do the function of, I guess, anti-terrorism. I mean, do you have any knowledge of that? Can you kind of piece that together to now?
Yeah.
Because it just seems like too obvious that, and the last word on that, that Mike Johnson and Pam Bondi and Stephen Miller and so forth, they've all come out very aggressively saying that this anti-fascist protest nationally, this no oligarchical, no kings, which is obviously the entirety of the United States, is a terrorist organization. I wonder if you, from your years long of experience, can make any of that make
Well,
sense to me.
you know, what we've done is discounted and cheapened the idea of look, terrorism remains a threat in this country and around the world. There's no question. I mean, we haven't learned that from Hamas. We haven't learned anything. Um, and and you can see just how brutal and ugly terrorism can be, as we saw on October 7th, a couple of years ago in Israel. Terrorism is a threat in the United States, but I think it's really important that we need to start to better define what it is and what it isn't. And I think politicians on the left and the right have been way too liberal in their definition of what a terrorist, a terrorism is, and used it to their political advantage. And I mean, I didn't like much about George W. Bush's administration, but what he did was he clearly was able to unify everybody in this country after 9/11, 2001, around the idea that there is a common enemy, and the common enemy are people who, from outside this country, want to disrupt our way of life, and to kill our family members potentially, and to disrupt our economy to an extent that we are no longer able to influence their part of the world, and that we needed to put in place some extraordinary measures to be able to deal with those folks. But I think from the very beginning, and I mean, everybody might not have agreed on every single bill that passed out in the wake of 9/11, but all of them were built around the idea of making a very hard and thoughtful and accurate distinction between the activity of terrorists and the and active free speech. They are not the same thing. And you can engage in free speech, even free speech that somebody else disagrees with, without being a terrorist. And you shouldn't even be subject to being accused of being a terrorist. And courts were set up in such a way as to be able to make those distinctions. Law enforcement was limited in what they could do by having to obtain warrants, even if they were from, courts that operated in secrecy because of the necessity of protecting people from true terrorist threats. But everything was built. The Patriot Act, for love it or hate it, it respected the Constitution. And what I'm worried about now is this cheapening of the concept of terrorist and who's a terrorist. Um, Makes it meaningless at the end of the day, um, and also is a convenient excuse to just toss that document that survived, going on 250 years, the U.S. Constitution, and I think that's a document worth saving and fighting for and protecting. And the right to disagree is absolutely part of it. Even if you agree with a country that whose tactics we disagree with, even if you agree with a country, agree with people that commit acts of terror, with that, as long as you're not committing acts of terror, you ought to be able to say so, with absolute protection. I mean, there's just nothing more important than that right of free speech. So at every turn, and this is what I'm hoping people will leave the No Kings rallies. And I'm going to take my 4-year-old grandson with me on Saturday, because I want him to see what protest and what democracy looks like, and what peaceful protest of the government, of a bad government policy. And his mother came from Uzbekistan, in the former she escaped the former Soviet Union. My daughter came over here from Uzbekistan, and escaped Soviet repression. Um, he's not going to go back. Henry's not going to go back and live in a country that where that's acceptable. And so, we need to teach our kids. We need to that this is not an acceptable, and we need to be adamant about it and not funny about it. And we need to then follow through, whether you're a lawyer or a social worker or can write a $20 check to the ACLU. You should be doing something about it. Leave that rally. Everybody should have a plan for what they're going to do, lobbying the politicians that believe in the rule of law to not just say it, but to take actions. To, as Bill Black suggests, to convene hearings in the state legislatures, in the legislatures where in the states, where there's not where folks aren't in the majority, to convene shadow hearings, and to put on evidence, to hear from the whistleblowers inside the agencies about what constitutional corners are being cut, what is being done that's disregarding the rights of American citizens. So nothing's more important. to any of us. And so we have to we have to balance peacefulness with anger. We need to balance, self-preservation with something that's going to actually work, and we need to make sure that all the communication that comes out of these things is designed to persuade. We're not going to win people over on Facebook. We're going to win people over by developing an argument about what kind of country we could have where we are not at risk of the federal government trampling on our constitutional rights, whether it's the right to free speech, whether it's the right to whether it's the right to go to work in a Mexican restaurant, or a meat packing plant, or a farm, to work for close to minimum wage. Those are all rights that exist and they need to be respected.
Well, you just addressed why I wanted to record with you, and thank you. I mean, you're a busy, busy guy, and you've taken the time, and we've got a little bit more time to discuss more. But I wanted to do this because I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to get our group, the new Untouchables, some of the best legal experts and folks who've had decades of experience fighting the good fight and know exactly how to fight this corruption that we're in the midst of. And I announced in my local No Kings rally back in June what our plan was. And we were able to get some impact. And now we're growing into other podcasts, and we're getting the word out there. We're building networks. There's a lot of things that are happening at the same time. I mean, we're literally flying the airplane and building it at the same time. But I wanted to get you one-on-one to talk about this stuff so that I can broadcast this out and hopefully get many of you to share, obviously like and subscribe, but share, most importantly, to everybody that's going to the No Kings rally. I'm going to send this again to the folks that are organizing the Cleveland rally, just so they have it. But when we announced sort of our collective effort, meaning you and Bill and June and Paul and the rest in Lewis, for example, and that's a huge part of this because of the Government Accountability Project. But when we first started to pen the strategy of what this incredible group of people, and I want to remind people, I shouldn't say remind, I'll remind those that watch these frequently, but hopefully this will be shared and seen by many, 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 many new people. Mark Dan is one of a kind. In my work, The Con, in this incredible odyssey that I went around the country to try to explore and find out how the 2008 great financial crisis came to be, what did and didn't happen in the aftermath. And in exploring the story, my colleague, thank God, had discovered through just a roundabout way some folks that had worked with Mark Dan on an investigation that would ultimately lead to indictments and a conviction of racketeering that mirrored exactly what the entire financial system of the United States was in the midst of. If you watch our program at thecon.tv, you'll come to discover that Mark Dan single-handedly with his team, with not nearly the kind of resources that he probably should have had, but with just enough to do the work on behalf of the American people, to discover how this crime was being orchestrated. And he did the work that the people depend on from professionals in our system that we put into elected office as attorneys generals and governors and those sorts of people that represent our interests, to do the work of the government to hold the bad guys accountable, which he did in a monumental way. The only guy in the country that was able to pull it off the way that he did, quite frankly, at his level. And also, there's a lot of reasons. I don't want to take anything away from what I just said. He's the only guy. Just remember that in a story that spread around the globe that was a monstrosity, Godzilla of tens of trillions of dollars of fraud, quite frankly. We're literally about to go through that again on a whole nother level of things. But the reason why I want the viewers to understand who Mark Dan is because he is literally one of the top legal minds in the country, and just incredible resources. And he's been in politics and that sort of thing. And so when he's addressing us and giving us this sort of insight about how we need to really approach this, honestly, blowing bubbles and dressing up in plastic things are great, and they're great for the kids. And we are in a spectacularly horrific moment. And 4 months ago, we laid out a plan that includes what he just laid out by way of what Bill Black has, and we'll talk about that a little bit further. But further to that, Mark Dan had his own initiative, and I want to just kind of give a couple of bullet points here, and then let you riff on this, Mark. But the idea was to find legal resources and allies throughout the country to do everything they could to lend their professional capital to victims of ICE, victims of tariff overreach, but in addition to that, and much more, one of the most important considerations that Mark and his team had developed, and I've known about, but we need to get to the next level, is to literally go after Section 230 that protects these giant platforms of propaganda for what we affectionately call the tech bros, right? Whether it's Elon Musk and X, whether it now we're seeing this consolidation in all of media. So I'll just stop there, and I hope maybe you can kind of just riff a little bit about some of the needs, what you bring to the table, and what we as a people need to be thinking about in terms of our collective resources here with the new untouchables that has to somehow emerge over this noise that people can't get past, quite frankly, blowing bubbles and dancing in front of ice. There's so much more that needs to be done. Can you pick up there, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody needs to champion the truth. I mean, when you talk about Section 230 of the Federal Communications Act, I think that needs to be repealed by Congress. Look, if you write an op-ed for the newspaper laying out your point of view adamantly, and you get something wrong that's inaccurate, then and you defame somebody, they can sue not just you, but they can sue the newspaper that carries it. But if you take that same op-ed and place it on Facebook or place it on a website, under the exception that was created by Congress, you can still sue me for what I say in my op-ed, but you can't sue the platform that's carrying it. There's no deterrent for the folks that are actually making money on the deal. Remember, all of these social media enterprises are making money trafficking your content and your ideas without any accountability to tell the truth. And that's damn scary. Now, Fox News has accountability as a traditional news purveyor, and they were held accountable, as you may remember.
Dominion.
Yeah, to the tune of $1 billion almost. Um, so what it just isn't. We cannot longer live in a world where that's the norm, where the norm is people being um, uh, getting a free pass to make billions of dollars purveying lies. I mean, look, I mean, fortunately, I don't have a boss, so I can't get fired. But that's how Charlie Kirk made his living. He had a platform where they purveyed a lot of lies. I mean, they also told some truth from time to time on that platform. And may he rest in peace. And he didn't deserve the way that nobody deserves to be killed for their ideas, and nor should have he. But let's be honest. I mean, there are Twitter or X as it's now called. All of these platforms, Facebook, are making millions of dollars with continuing to convey inaccurate information with no accountability for that. And that's got to come to an end because and what can we do? So in the long run, we got to elect people that are going to repeal those laws. In the short term, what we need to do is make sure that when we protest, when we speak out, that we do so angrily and accurately, and we back up what we do with facts. What we need to make sure that the office holders in this country, Democrat or Republican, that believe in the rule of law and believe in that we are a democracy and not an authoritarian state, that they use and that's the lesson from the con and from what we did in the AG's office in 2007 and 2008, which is take whatever resources and power you have and mobilize it towards the goal of making sure that democracy, free speech, and the rule of law is protected. I don't think that's asking too much of our elected officials. If people in mass are pulling people off the streets in the United States of America, then they ought to be arrested for kidnapping, and the local prosecutor ought to do that. If if troops are being deployed, or your National Guard is being mobilized for a purpose that is in violation of federal law, and there's no actual insurrection going on, and they're being mobilized under the Insurrection Act, then you attorneys, Mr. or Ms. Attorney General, need to go to law to court and sue. And so far, those that have done have had success, and that pushback has happened. And all of us need to hold those elected officials accountable to do those things, and everybody from a mayor to a city council person to an attorney general to a prosecutor, everybody's got a role to play, and everybody should play their role. And what we did because the Justice Department refused to investigate the fraud that went on mortgages during the great financial crisis, is we pieced together. We borrowed people from the auditors' offices in certain counties. We borrowed people from our Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and trained them. We needed people that knew how to do math, so we went to the state auditor and borrowed some people from there, to be able to look at those spreadsheets and to understand, what was happening with all those transactions. That's what we need to expect of every single local office holder in this country. They all swear a duty to the Constitution of the United States. And they need to take that much more seriously, and we need to hold them accountable to do that. Those are the kind of messages, I think, and the kind of the agenda that needs to come out of these No Kings rallies tomorrow. And I hope that that's what people take away. Not that there was a great party or Halloween's in 2 weeks.
Yeah, just the opposite. I mean, Adam Schiff from California had said on Lawrence O'Donnell last week, for example, what we as the Democratic leadership are doing is just basically in this James Carville lexicon, I believe, waiting out to see how much the American people are going to take and then somehow win the midterms, 19 months from now.
Yeah.
We know that there's no time to waste. And, this movement by the new untouchables is so enormous. What there was something that you said in there that I'm trying to remember because it was such a key consideration. But I'm going to move on to one of the other elements that we need to discuss. I mean, your law firm has brought a civil lawsuit challenging a civil rights lawsuit, pardon me, challenging Ashland County Fair censorship. Can you bring us up to speed on that?
Yeah, and that's again part of my idea that we need to, and I'm putting my money where and my lawyers where my mouth is. We need to challenge every attack on constitutional rights, including free speech. It was really pretty horrifying. The Democratic Party in Ashland County has a booth at the county fair. Every Democratic Party in the state, and I assume in most states, has a booth at their county fair. At the booth, there was a display of buttons that were made. Those buttons had MAGA-looking hats with slogans that were against the administration, because they were Democrats and they were talking about Republicans, and which is what that's what the Democratic Party does. They were conveying a message. They were displaying those. They weren't even for sale. You could make a donation, and they accepted donations, but it was not. They were there on display for people to see and to spark conversation. And the Ashland County Sheriff stepped in, confiscated those buttons, and the Fair Board then terminated the right of the Ashland County Democratic Party to continue to operate their booth at the fair. I mean, what's a more direct exercise of somebody's free speech right is than having a political booth at a county fair. And the Ashland County Agricultural Committee substituted their judgment for the constitutional right of the Ashland County Democrats to talk to the people of Ashland County as they traveled through the fair. Nobody made people go up to that booth, but that booth was available so that that dialogue could happen. Just like the Republicans had a booth. And if the Libertarians wanted one, they could have a booth at the Ashland County Fair and should have a booth. So we're suing both the sheriff for confiscating the buttons and the fair board for terminating the booth at the fair to get an injunction to make sure that next year's fair will have a Democratic booth where those ideas can be discussed again and make sure that the rule of law is. But you have to take on every single authoritarian act that happens. I mean, those were not threats to President Trump. They were expressions of dissent to a president that has alarmed a lot of people. And I think a federal judge is going to see it our way.
Wow, Mark. I mean, maybe it's tis the season of Halloween, but that's a serious nightmare. I mean, it doesn't sound like the Democratic Party of Ashland were behind, I don't know, masks and headwear that Yasser Arafat would wear, and they weren't, obviously torching rocks into the county fair, and yet they were kind of being treated as such, given what we've heard Pam Bondi and Steve Miller and Mike Johnson and obviously Trump and yada yada yada, right? I mean, come on, this is almost beyond absurd.
The most protected thing under the U.S. Constitution is political speech and political dissent. And part of what's kept our democracy together and kept our country together and so unified all these years has been our respect for the opinions and the rights of those that disagree with us to speak their truth. And that is but what Donald Trump has reminded the country is that that's a battle that has to be fought every single day of the week, and that's what we're doing.
Well, you just gave, I think, closing commentary, but we've got 5 minutes, and I'm not trying to basically, what am I thinking of? Just kind of keep it going along. But the bottom line is, I want to give you a closing a comment here because, again, the leadership of the indivisible national organization and those in Ohio, particularly Cleveland, which I'm going to forward to this right away, they're not fully understanding the forest for the trees. It's like I feel like I'm in a movie and I'm seeing a bunch of, I'm sorry, people who haven't been around the block like we have, like you have, people that don't know the system. They're not professionals. They don't understand what is going on. And I get the fact that you want millions of people out there because you've got to demonstrate to the country that there's more of us than them and all of those kinds of things, which are very important. And I applaud the satire. Trust me, I applaud it. But without a plan, without experts, without people to be able to fight back, because we know, and this was the last thing I want to say. This is why I'm milking it, and that was the metaphor I was looking for. You initially, when Los Angeles experienced ICE in the beginning, you came up with this concept, and Bill Black has pulled us up because you guys are all professionals. And what we're seeing in the Department of Justice, we obviously saw all the IGs leave. We saw all the professionals, the guys who've been around forever. They've left. So the only ones left are people willing to lie for Pam Bondi and Trump. And they want to quash all of the whistleblowers. They want to quash everybody who's a challenge to them. But there's one little caveat that actually can be a bit of a determinant against them, and that's the Bar Association. Can you close out here based on kind of previous conversations and your
Yeah,
insight on that?
yeah. I mean, look, I think every lawyer needs to defend the honor and integrity of our profession. The fundamental basis of our of the successful legal system that we have in this country is the fact that the truth is paramount and has to take precedence over everything else, even when it's unpleasant, even when it's uncomfortable. It is a lawyer's first duty when they get bad news for a client is to tell the client the bad news. If lawyers didn't tell the clients bad news, the whole system would fall on its face and nobody would trust their lawyer. The courts need to be able to trust when a lawyer says something that it is grounded in fact, and when they make a representation about legal precedent or what the law is, that it's grounded in actual case law and decisions that are made. There's nothing more fundamental. And so we have a great history of prohibiting people from participating in our profession who choose not to do that. And a number of people, and I think we've learned from the Government Accountability Project, sad stories of people at the U.S. Justice Department that are being asked to make misrepresentations to federal courts and to state courts and to the public. Lawyers have no business doing that, and if they do, they ought to be disbarred. And so, in addition to challenging in court any action by the federal government that even begins to echo of violation of constitutional rights or authoritarianism, any act by a lawyer acting on behalf of the government or acting on behalf of a political actor who is making a misrepresentation to the court or to the world ought to be taken very seriously and ought to be pursued. And as unpleasant as it is, and nobody likes to see a lawyer sanctioned, especially a lawyer that's been sanctioned, like me, in my experience. And I'm, happy to talk and explain that to whoever asks me about it because I have to. That should be the situation of everybody that makes a misrepresentation as it relates to anything. There is not chaos in the streets of Portland. There is not. There isn't gunfire in Chicago that's directly related to the presence of people who do not have the proper documentation of citizenship to go to a 7-Eleven. And to make those representations to a judge is something that should cost those lawyers their license. And frankly, those lawyers should say no. And those acts of civil disobedience matter. And again, it's like the discussion we had about Section 230, and we need to go. If you want to make America great again, here's how. Let's make everybody accountable for the truth of what they say, whether they're a lawyer in a courtroom, whether they're a social media site that's making money by republishing untrue things that activists say, whether in any context. Let's leave the No Kings rally with a commitment to fight for the truth every single place we go in our lives. And if you just do that, I think we've got a shot at pushing back this movement towards authoritarianism.
Well, brilliantly stated. And we know in our personal lives, we're supposed to know what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. But of course, as you preface, the Government Accountability Project did exactly that with their whistleblower as it related to Emil Bove and his directions to the Department of Justice to ignore what was it, the appeals court, or it was in the context of all of the things that were going on with ICE in Los Angeles. And then, of course, that guy gets approved to go to what, the Third Circuit Court, I guess, which is a pipeline to the Supreme Court. So America, yeah, we're up against it. We're up against it, and those of us with the better angels of our nature have to come to the fore and rise just like everybody else has throughout American history to provide the freedoms that I think many of us took for granted. But you're not going to for long if we don't come together and rise to the moment in the millions with the right architecture and the right determination, but forged from leaders like Mark Dan. Please check out Mark Dan at his law firm at danlaw.com. I'll have a description if you ever want to get in contact with him, if you're a podcaster, if you're media, if you're others, and I'll just tease this last piece. There's another lawsuit that Mark is involved with his firm that literally discovered that the billionaire owners of the Cleveland Browns were in cahoots with the state of Ohio to claim unclaimed funds of widows and vulnerable people around the state to help manifest, I believe, the rebuild for the new Brown Stadium. What we've discovered on our journey is greed has no limits. And when they also can get away with lawlessness, they will. And the only reason we have the law is to hold the guilty accountable, and truth matters, as does justice. So thank you, Mark. I
Thank you,
appreciate you.
Patrick.
We're going to keep going on as the day goes,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I've got to get this to everybody who needs to see it. So all the
appreciate it.
best to you. Talk to you soon. Take
Thank you.
care.